Thank you. Thank you very much, and very warm welcome and good afternoon to all of you. I know for a fact it is a challenging task to moderate and speak and also hear after we had a very good lunch, but we'll try our level best to keep it more interesting. Today's panel discussion is centered on the steps to catapult India as a leader in solar manufacturing. Today, when we look at the context of manufacturing, India was one of the largest manufacturers of solar modules and cells until 2010. In the period between 2010 and 2020, we transformed into one of the largest importers. Today, at the backdrop of a plethora of initiatives that the government has taken, we are now in a position to cement our stand as one of the leading manufacturers in the solar domain. In the course of today's discussion, I'll be requesting my fellow panelists to give their inputs and insights along with their suggestions on where we are today as a country in the manufacturing context, where are we headed, and what can be done to make this journey much more efficient and pleasant. I have received a request from Ms. Anita George that ma'am has a next appointment at 3 o'clock. So maybe I'll begin with you, Ms. George. You are a familiar face for all of us. You have been watching India's market since its inception, if I may say, in the solar journey. But now we are talking about a manufacturing part. So how do you see the global scenario of manufacturing today in solar? And where do you see India's role fitting in this global context?
Thanks very much, Subbu, and thank you for inviting me to be here. As we were just joking among ourselves that this is the sleepy hour, so we have to say something meaningful to make sure that all of you stay awake. And thank you also being so considerate, because unfortunately I had to leave at 3 p.m. and I don't mean to be rude, but I have to leave. So I will just say my part. In terms from a global perspective, I think what I can say is that every part of the globe, after what has happened during COVID and the uncertainties of the supply chain, every country in the world that is a big solar energy, has solar energy as a big share of its energy mix, has decided actually to onshore the supply chains for solar panels. And this is something, as Subbu mentioned, that India had already thought of back in 2010. In fact, during my days in IFC, we were one of the early financiers of solar manufacturing. And we learnt the hard way in terms of why solar manufacturing at that time was too early. However, having said that, I think this time is absolutely the right time for India. This is India's moment for really going big on solar manufacturing. If you look at the USA, who has introduced the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really giving a huge impetus to green manufacturing, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's solar, whether it's batteries. And there is a big push, in fact, on increasing domestic content, on having manufacturing and job creation happen in the US. Just yesterday, Europe has come out with its regulations, which also is talking about onshoring manufacturing and also is talking about domestic content and job creation. And the Russia-Ukraine war has just given that much more of an impetus to Europe's policy, which was in the making for some time, but now I think the urgency has really come to the front, and Europe is also moving in that direction. In India, I think the government has taken very many positive steps to give the kind of incentives needed for solar manufacturing. And through Subbu, I would say my only request would be, please don't change those policies, because one of the big deterrents for investors anywhere in the world is if you have flip-flopping in policy. So it's very important that we stay with those policies that have been put in place and don't try and reinvent the policies at every stage. The second, I would say, and this is a little bit self-serving because I'm setting up a fund, Edhina, which is focused on technology. I think India should really look at where is it that we have a comparative advantage. And I think in new technologies, new kinds of solar panels, that's really where India could lead. If you look at the traditional polysilicon-based technologies for manufacturing, a lot has happened already in China, and despite all efforts, I think China will continue to play a leading role in that technology, partly because of the supply chain. I think India can really play a great role in terms of looking at new technologies, whether it's thin film, perovskites, tandem, any of these which are now taking off and improving both efficiency and durability of solar panels. Edhina has the tech talent. We just need to make sure that we give the kind of incentivization. And we are seeing through Edhina a lot of really very promising up-and-coming companies that are bringing up new technologies. So my sort of push would be for green, cleaner solar panel manufacturing. And the last point I would make is really in terms of being globally cost competitive. So one of the things that we learned long back is to be cost competitive, the entire supply chain, end-to-end for solar manufacturing needs to be in India. Today, India is nowhere at that level where we can say that we have a complete supply chain for solar available in India. And which is also in some ways a positive, because we can really build rather than inheriting something which exists. And in building, I would say that we should really focus on a green supply chain which follows very high standards of ESG, and that is going to be a huge competitive advantage for India. And we can do it because we've done it in other sectors. I'll end with giving you one example. If you go back to the days when Maruti set up its vendor financing program, vendor development program, there was a conscious effort to bring in MSMEs and other manufacturers to build up the auto component supply chain for Maruti. It was done consciously and as a program. And the financing for that supply chain was also organized by Maruti, where banks were willing to lend because Maruti was the off-taker. So to all the large solar manufacturers, I would say, green your supply chain, play a role in helping those MSMEs that are your suppliers get financing. And by doing so, you can really gain competitive advantage globally. I'll stop there.
But maybe I have one more question for you, and it is sort of linked with where you stopped. You have seen very closely on the funding ecosystem for developing large-scale projects. Now, when we look at manufacturing, like you said, it is technically not a market consolidation aspect where you have only the bigger players. You need to have an entire succession where you have the bigger players, then MSMEs, then local suppliers. So where do you see the challenge in terms of financing the lower strata of the players who are maybe a direct beneficiary of the vertical integration, or is the end part supplier to the consumer? Where do you see the challenge, and how can we do something to facilitate financing at the last mile?
So I definitely see a challenge, and that's why I actually brought up the Maruti example, because they face the same challenge in auto components. Nobody wanted to finance a small auto component guy who's making the plastic headrest for the seat. However, the way Maruti structured it was that they gave the offtake of the product, and the banks could see that very transparently, and based on that offtake, they were willing to finance. So I would say it has to be programmatic. It doesn't have to be the government. In fact, I know that Chandrima is going to tell us more about what Invest India is doing. I think it can be the private sector, and the private solar panel manufacturers have the most to gain. Because you see, it also gives you a license to operate, in that you're creating jobs right up the supply chain. I would just say that to gain that competitive advantage, make sure that it's green. Because Europe has also come out with this regulation, I think again very recently, that supply chains will have to demonstrate that they are green supply chains. We have done a little bit of it. Like, I think the government has said in the manufacturing of solar, at least 20% should be green energy. What Europe and other developed markets are expecting is that that should be 100%. And actually, if we put our mind to it, I think India can do it. So.
Thank you very much, Ms. George, and we are very glad that you were able to join us. Maybe we can have a token of appreciation that ET team has made for you as a gesture to thank you for your presence and giving us your time amidst a very busy schedule. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much, Ms. George. Now, I think we have a very good context set that as a country, we are at a critical juncture in our manufacturing journey. While we are in a position to consolidate our leadership in manufacturing, globally the trend has changed on ensuring that more and more domestic manufacturing comes up. So my next question is to Ms. Chandrima Sinha from Invest India. So Ms. Sinha, as Invest India, we would like to know your perspective on how was it possible for India, who not more than 5 to 6 years ago was not at all in the global manufacturing narrative, to now suddenly become the main participant or be at the center of this manufacturing narrative. I can name other sectors, but in solar we are definitely there. So what changed and what led us to come here, and where are we going from here?
Thanks, Subbu. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for paying attention to us post that delicious lunch. So hopefully this will be an interesting discussion and we will not, lull you to sleep. So essentially, I'd like to answer that question by bringing up firstly the drastic change in mindset. If you recall, we had a solar mission earlier as well, and we had, I think, Jen and URM, and if you remember those targets, it was, I think, wanted to achieve by 2022 some 20 gigawatt in 2020. And we are right now at upwards of 65 almost gigawatts. And so the drastic target, upward revision of target that happened in I think 2014, 2015 is when we started at Invest India to go out and start talking about the new 175 gigawatt target. And there everybody used to say that, we're not going to achieve it. Not only did we achieve it, now we've set even more ambitious targets. So it was a complete change in mindset, because the ability to believe, as ma'am also just said, that it is definitely achievable. So to start thinking in terms of that what is achievable and that can do thing, and our domestic industry and the foreign industry also responded very positively. And going forward now, we have also added the new targets under the decarbonization. We have taken a pioneering stand on the green hydrogen also. So all across, there has been a mindset change, and not only at the central level, where we had a very robust regulatory system with SECI, MNRE, NCFI, IREDA, all pitching in. But please note the competitive atmosphere that has come in within the states. You have every state announcing a better policy, trying to outdo the other states. So you've had Jharkhand, which last July announced huge targets. We have Goa, which announced a new policy on, open access. So every state is doing its bit. Rajasthan is introducing new incentives. So the landscape is, the ecosystem is far more amenable for manufacturing. And in addition, we have had different schemes. We have had the PLI 1, PLI 2. Then recently, because of the supply chain shocks, we have also introduced the ALMM thing, which again, and it's also a very reactive policy landscape, because we had ALMM, but because we realized that our targets were so ambitious and the sourcing was less, so we again revisited ALM, and it was a response that we couldn't just announce and sit back. The government has been constantly responsive. So far more responsive ecosystem from both the government and the industry side, with obviously there are a number of regulations that have come in. So
Thank you for that. I think demand has been the main driving factor for us, like you rightly mentioned. And with us on stage, we have two of the largest manufacturers, and now I would like to hear from their perspective. Maybe I will start with Manmohan ji from Shirdi side. You are one of the 3 winners of PLI 1, which for the first time solar manufacturing has come under the ambit of PLI, and around 4,500 crores have been awarded. And then you have also participated in PLI 2. So how has your experience been, and how PLI as a driving factor helped you make any decision in terms of scaling up manufacturing? If you can answer that. And over and above PLI, what are the kind of support as a manufacturer you are looking that government can offer, which can accelerate our installation of the capacity?
Okay, thank you, Subbu. So, as you mentioned that we have already won PLI 1, around 4 gigawatt, and we hope that we will also be in the fray for the PLI 2. We have bid for 6 gigawatt. So overall the capacity what we propose to manufacture would be around 10 gigawatt. I'm sure you guys are aware that we are competing with no one less than China. So these manufacturing facilities what India is making has to be a sustainable one, long-term, competitive, at a very, very competitive rate, wherein we have to be very, very close or better than China. So in terms of when we won PLI 1 and when we did the working, of course, even before the winning the bid, when we applied for it, we were aware of this fact. And we did almost a 1-year study for understanding what this is about, why polysilicon is not made, why it was earlier done in US. It started, the technology actually started in US and European countries. However, most of the plants got, either bankrupt or they stopped the production, and slowly the entire manufacturing facility shifted to China. And today, as we speak, around 90 to 95% of the production is happening in China. So PLI scheme definitely is one of the scheme which encourages us to do it. And as a investor in PLI 1 and the winner in PLI 1, one observation which we have in terms of monitoring is that the kind of information what PLI, IRDA, though it is very supportive, but they are supposed to ask certain information from every quarter or monthly basis from the manufacturer. Here, see, there are two parts to the integrated facility. One is the upstream, where what we define as an upstream, where we manufacture polysilicon, and one is from wafer to module. While the technology for wafer to module is quite standard and it can be replicated, you have lines. The technology for polysilicon is quite, I would say, scarce. One or two people or European or US firms have that technology, and when we exchange those information, to give these information at micro level is little difficult for us. So one request what we have already made that though the monitoring is required, but it can be at a macro level, not the details of the agreements and all those things. So that is on the PLI 1 what we observed. Otherwise they are very, very supportive, they guide us, and everything is perfect. In terms of incentive, if you see, I'm a finance person, so for me, all the incentives ultimately has to be in terms of like monetary, gains. If you see the kind of PLI system works is, you have given us 3 years to manufacture, to set up the plant, the facility, and from there you give us 5 years this incentive in a tapering manner. So initially it will be slightly more, and if you see the overall PLI structure, the capex which is subsidized in the absolute terms is around 18% of the cost. However, if you see the actual cash flows and if you take an NPV, it will be not more than 10 to 11%. So whereas the cost difference between Indian manufacturer and a Chinese manufacturer on a ballpark, if you see, is around, the difference in the capex itself is around 20 to 30%. So even number one, we are getting this PLI on a delayed basis, so that 18% benefit comes down to 11%. Now, number two, these benefits are taxable. When we get it is so another we have to pay tax on that. Number three, there is uncertainty. Now, even in the past, we have been discussing that some incentive schemes have been announced, but the payment have not been received. Hopefully, that would not be the case in our. But still, there is uncertainty. So, to compete with country like China and other Asian countries like Taiwan and other countries where these manufacturing are happening now, apart from PLI, like for example, Europe, they have done they have created two platforms. One is for solar manufacturing accelerator, and one is a solar manufacturing program for investment. So both the platforms are different. The first platform concentrate on the technology. They handheld the operators or the developers to understand the technology. They have in this platform they have their national technology partners, their researchers on board. So whoever registers themselves in this platform, they are they have access and they have meetings. So there is a enabler in terms of technology providing. The second platform, which is for enabling the funding, they are companion throughout till the entire funding is done. So they are from the moment. Of course, after due diligence, the developer wins the scheme, and then they have minimum requirement. And once they register, they are with them. They act as a bridge, between the developer and the funders, the investors, because each one of them have their own plus points, and once both of them come together, then the projects happen. So such kind of enablers, if it also happens in India, where we have a platform where the government acts, like for example in Europe, the battery schemes, when they were incentive schemes for them, they had this, they have a platform where it's a forum for structure, like European fund for strategic industries, SCI. They are the enablers, and EIB is the funders. So the first agency give the first loss guarantee. So the moment they get a first loss guarantee, EIB is in a more, they can increase their funding to, let's say instead of like funding 5, they can fund 10 or 15 because the first loss guarantee is there, so the risk is spread out. So such kind of enabler, if it's there in India, maybe some larger institutions like REC, IRDA or PFC, they can come in, have like a guarantee scheme, so then the nationalized banks and other banks can follow in. So that also would help a lot.
No, I think you have rightly mentioned that in terms of new and emerging technologies, we need kind of a strong support from the government. And maybe I'll start from the same point with Mr. Manish. So what do you think is needed? Because Jinko is one of the largest manufacturers in the world. You have seen the market as it is. What do you think can be done in India which can help us attract more innovative state-of-the-art technologies? Maybe we can, do R&D here and incubate them here, produce here and send it across the world. So what is it that is stopping us, and what can be done to enable this homegrown innovation in high efficiency modules?
Thanks. Good afternoon, and really thanks for this typical question to a manufacturer. There are several factors which are required for any country to be a leader in manufacturing in any sector, and when we talk about China, being one of the largest manufacturing setups in the world, in any sector, there are definitely reasons behind it. And Jinko, what they have done, they have benefited from those schemes and programs available in China. And in various forums, we have really touched upon those programs to our Indian counterparts, to policymakers as well. So some of the key factors and the enablers which were there in a Chinese program were there were top run programs, in past, which enabled high efficiency module production for their own projects. There were different tariffs available for adopting high efficiency modules against the conventionally efficient modules. Those were the times of polycrystalline modules, and the efficiencies were around 19-20%. So they created a platform where even if the efficiency is above 20%, those will get better tariffs, and people were encouraged to adopt those technologies and those type of products to get better tariffs. Similar program was kept in the PLI scheme, where we had kept a threshold of efficiency. So these were the points taken by a PLI program from the various global setups. Another program which was running there is the incentivization of the production or export from China. So in India, we are also doing the same, I think, but we are incentivizing only the production. We must also incentivize the export from India from these PLI schemes with additional rupees per watt peak production or some kind of other incentive, which will encourage the Indian manufacturers to produce high quality and high efficiency products, which will be in demand in the global countries. The next one is the power cost. China is offering very low power cost for the industries to run. I have never seen in India such kind of power cost, which are deciding factors for the cost of generation or production in India. There are definitely several states who are offering investments in their state, and they are offering very low power for the industries. Also, we have seen several GST waivers by the states. So such things are already there in China, and I think it is very easy to learn from the best practices of the world. India has been doing this in past, but we now are at a stage where we need to see the results. We have to quickly adopt all these practices and policies and look at the way other markets have developed themselves. Another important point is the ancillary around the main hub. For example, if you look at Jinko facilities, wherever Jinko has its manufacturing facilities, we have all the ancillaries within 100 kilometers radius. So which gives us a quick logistic advantage, cost advantage, and we know that whatever support our suppliers or our partners need in the whole supply chain, we can quickly, support them. Ms. George mentioned before about supporting by finances, and she took example of Maruti. So exactly the same thing is already happening in China, and we have seen it is being done in India in clusters. For example, in Gujarat, there are some clusters which are having those kind of ancillaries, but not all across the country. So we need to adopt all of these best practices from across the world and see how much India can benefit from this. Thanks.
I think all the 3 points that you mentioned are something that the government has worked on or is working on. The efficiency part, PLI, like you said, takes into consideration the efficiency, and I think the higher the efficiency, the more PLI you get. The 2 other points that you mentioned on the power cost and incentivizing, I think that is something that as a country we can learn and take it forward. Now, for the second half of the discussion, let us look at the future. Today we have installed 63,500 megawatt of solar in the country. Another 60,200 megawatt is in pipeline. And our target is to achieve 280,000 megawatt of solar by 2030, which is exactly 7 years and 9 months from now. So keeping these figures in mind, we need to add around 30 gigawatt of capacity every year. This is India's context. On the global scale, last year it has become the first year where our year-on-year additions for solar have crossed 200 gigawatt across the world. And solar has become the first renewable energy generation technology that has crossed 1 terawatt, that is 1000 gigawatt. So there is an upscaling demand outside India. The third aspect is we are seeing lot of global procurers or IPPs who are looking at a so-called policy called China Plus One, where that plus one is where India is being seen as a leader. If we are able to do things right, and if PLI 1, PLI 2 and our domestic manufacturing supply can get to a mark that we are sort of predicting, which is around 100 gigawatt of module production by 2026 or 2027, and 60 gigawatt of polysilicon wafer production. These figures will definitely help India to cement its position as one of the largest manufacturers, if not the largest. So now I would like to ask the panelists on how do you see India achieving these figures, and if there are any impediments or challenges in the road to achieving this, what can be done today? Because what we did in auto manufacturing, what we did in pharma manufacturing is what we are going to do now in solar manufacturing. The scale, the demand and the market that is available to us has never been this big. So maybe Manmohanji, if you can give your insights, and also if you can sort of spill out some secrets of Shirdi Sai also on how much capacity you are planning above PLI and how much you'd like to bring into the market for India as well as outside.
Sure. So, in terms of capacities, as I mentioned earlier, we are definitely going for 10 gigawatt, whether we are in PLI 2 or not. We are very hopeful that we would be in PLI 2 as well. So, 4 plus 6, anyway, 10 gigawatt is what we are planning. In terms of being a long-term sustainable competitive manufacturer, we are seeing that we are manufacturing, or we should have control over the complete supply chain. So our motto is that from mine to module. That is the ultimate achievement what we are working towards. We will be procuring quartz to silicon to poly to wafer, cell, of course, module. So during this journey, we also know that there are 2 or 3 key parameters which we need to keep in control. As rightly mentioned, that power is one of the, for the upstream, which is polysilicon, around 40% cost is of power. So yes, states have given us some concessions. We have got some GST reliefs. We have got preferable rate of power in initial years. And we also plan to have captive power, and we also got approvals for 7.2 gigawatt for the combination of wind, solar, and PSP. So down the line, after having this 10 gigawatt, we maybe after 3 years, 2 years of COD, achieving COD, we'll also go for our captive power plant, wherein we'll try to achieve the net zero, the green energy part. Post achieving this, of course, we do have another plans to go another, like similar line of, because we have spent a lot of money. We would be spending money on technology, and we would like the country also and ourselves, our company also, to benefit from this technology. So once we complete the phase 1, the phase 2 also will be there. But that is a plan which is for the future. But currently we are concentrating on this 10 gigawatt plus our captive power plant, which will be the next stage. On the competitiveness, as I mentioned, once we have control on these 2 major requirements, there are other supply chain which we need are on the utility fronts, like the silicon paste, silver paste, argon gas, and all those things. So while the capacities are built up in the country, these facilities would also slowly come up, because India is a very robust economy, and people are quite dynamic, and they would definitely all these ancillary units would definitely come up to support the manufacturing system. And as rightly Subbu mentioned, that there is demand, there is a goal which we have to achieve as a country, and large players along are coming up and setting up these manufacturing plant. So I don't see there much hurdles apart from this few which I mentioned, which we have to take cognizance and act accordingly to see that they are within our control. Otherwise, it is quite achievable.
Great. So maybe Mr. Manish, if you can add on it and let us know, how do you see this road to 100 gigawatt of manufacturing, and if Jinko would also be part of this journey, maybe.
Yeah. So thanks. First of all, I think the point which I just learned, that India is offering those kind of special power subsidies or GST waivers, I think is very welcome news. But on top of it, we also have to see that the technology curve, where we are going in this technology curve, are we just followers, or we are the leaders? So for have that kind of a leadership mindset, we have to look at least a decade or 2 decades ahead, where the technology is going. We were listening to the previous panel, and we learned that, the lithium-ion battery was in design stage for last 2 decades, and now it has become the mainstream. So something similar we have to look at. Every technology has its expiry date. So we have seen that, the conventional technologies, which are polysilicon, have given way to monocrystalline now, and God knows, this technology will give way to which new technology. So we should keep innovating. India should invest in R&D in big way. There should be special schemes and programs to encourage R&D in the country. I want to give you one perspective, that Jinko itself invests approximately 5% of its turnover back into the R&D. So for a company like 60 gigawatt annual production, you can imagine the scale of the investment going into R&D. I don't see any company in India is even investing 1% into their R&D for innovations or those kind of new technology inventions. We have to look beyond it. There are definitely new technologies which are in the lab levels. So we have to create some kind of incubation programs through IITs or through some special government channels, and we have to see what these technologies can do in the coming times, how India can adopt, how India can become a leader. The same way we are adopting hydrogen technologies now, and we are aiming to be a leader in this technology. Let's look at all the possibilities to become a leader in solar technologies as well, and do not be a follower. What China is doing, they are actually compelled to enhance the same technology by way of efficiencies. China cannot invest into any new technology overnight, but India has this platform that India can now look at the new investments into new technologies altogether, and rather than just following what China is doing, we can create our own market, our own leadership position in the world, and then make that technology at a competitive price, so that the world will look at India as a very viable option to China. So that's one major factor. Second is the way finances are being done. We always look at the returns. So there have to be some support by the government agencies to support and fund these new technologies and manufacturing on maybe trial basis, such that they can see some commercial scale, and then adaptation is very easy in the long run. Thank you.
Like the lab to ground gestation period, if it is decreased or if it can be supported by the government, that can propel new innovative technologies to come on ground. I fully agree with you. Ms. Sinha, Invest India is the gateway for foreign investors or foreign technology companies to come to India, and vice versa. We have seen in the renewable field, partly the reason for us to be this successful is it's a 100% FDI field, and we have received investors and investments that has propelled our journey and accelerated it in terms of increasing 17 times in capacity in a span of 7 years. So for manufacturing, is there or are there any initiatives that Invest India has ongoing that can support maybe joint ventures between Indian and foreign companies, or that can help these foreign companies enter Indian market, or that can help or ensure that we are also recipients or getting appetite for high efficiency technologies?
Thanks, Subbu. So just to step back a little, and to Invest India is the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency, and as such we work with domestic companies as well, and we are working with most of the big names. So broadly, what the two-pronged role that we play is also to expand the market and then to facilitate the investment. So one of the major, I guess, the supply chain block is that the distribution end. Unless we expand the capacity of the discoms to, take the renewable energy that is being produced at a much cheaper price, and we talked about the higher cost of power, because that is not getting translated at the consumer end. The industrial consumer or the domestic consumer doesn't have a choice. It is taking power at the price the discoms are quoting. So even if we keep on expanding the production, unless that actually expands the market at the consumption end, you can imagine how much the manufacturing will get a boost if that opens up. So the Electricity Generation Act has been tabled already, and we are also working with taking the feedback and working with the ministries to ensure the right inputs are given. And while the center power remains a state subject and center has a limited role and just a guidance and the leadership role, we hope that again this would be an area where competitive federalism will kick in, and every state would want to ensure that their discom is distributing power at the most efficient cost to their citizens. So that is one aspect of how we are expanding. Plus we are working in trying to support SECI and all in coming up with new kinds of tenders, because in order to reach those targets, we also have to come out with a higher number of tenders and more innovative kind of tenders. So there's hybrid solar, and now even corporate PPAs are also coming. So new kinds of models are there. We have worked with all the regulatory agencies. We regularly hold investor feedback session, both domestic and foreign, and we promoted the PLI 1 when it came out, and also the PLI 2 where we've hosted these sessions and worked to explain the details to companies. worked with companies till late in the night to ensure that the applications went in. So that kind of hand-holding support we have provided. In terms of creation of JVs, that's such, we allow companies to discover each other, because as a national agency, we can't step in and say, okay, you match up with each other. So we just try to create that environment as such. And in terms of issue resolution, and I'd like to talk about two mechanisms that we have. One is the project monitoring system, which is a mechanism under the Cabinet Secretariat, where any company, private company, can also approach for any kind of issue like a land acquisition right of way that they have. And we have a mechanism that is chaired from the Cabinet Secretariat, works with the Chief Secretaries of the states to ensure that these delays and bottlenecks are quickly resolved and a project reaches resolution at a fast pace and projects are commissioned on time. So I would encourage anybody, because I have been hearing a lot more of land acquisition issues that are coming in. So this would also be a mechanism that companies can take recourse to. And the other is the National Single Window System, which is a genuine single one-stop shop, which is nsws.gov.in. One can go, and that would tell you what are all the regulatory requirements that any state government requires to set up your plant. So that is on a simple place, and not just in one state. Through a single application, you can apply in all the other states. So that those are two mechanisms that Invest India is executing for the Ministry of Commerce, and I would encourage all manufacturers to please, take advantage of these.
Thank you very much. I think we are now at the end and the time's up. We had a very, very insightful panel discussion today, and this is a topic which we can keep on talking for the whole day. But the true essence of the discussion remains that India is at the center of energy transition today that is happening across the world. But along with that, India is also at the center of another transition, which is into becoming a hub for global manufacturing in terms of solar. We have received a lot of insights, suggestions, inputs, and appreciation of what's happening in the ecosystem so far. And I'm sure, I'm very confident that India will be in line to achieve its ambitious targets. And I would like to thank ETEnergyWorld for giving us this opportunity, and thank the panelists, Ms. George, Ms. Sinha, Mr. Awasthi, and Mr. Narula for joining us today, and handing it back to the host.